My name, again, is Trevor Eischen, and it's really an honor to be here in Kazakhstan speaking to you. I landed today in Almaty after flying all the way from Sacramento, California, to LA, to Turkey, and now I'm here. So excuse me if I'm a little bit groggy while I deliver this presentation. If I pass out, you can just poke me a few times and I'll wake up and resume delivering this keynote. Well, first, actually, now that I'm on stage in front of all of you, I want to make sure that I get some of my own go viral content. So I'm going to take a selfie. So everyone make sure to smile and wave while I do this. You guys look really good. All right, so a little bit of background on me. So they kind of explain to you what I am, what I do. I currently work at CalMatters. It's a nonprofit in Sacramento, California. We cover state government and policy. It's a fairly new organization, and we're trying to fill in a hole that's been created by a lot of newsroom layoffs in the Golden State. Before working at CalMatters, I was at Politico in Washington, D.C. From 2013 to 2018. I started as a web producer and made my way up to becoming the social media editor. While I was there, I covered the 2016 presidential election and the first year of the Trump administration, and I'll talk a little bit about some of those experiences later in the presentation. I graduated from the University of Missouri in 2012, and I love to travel, and I would love to learn more about your country and the things that you're doing to make your content go viral. So during the Q&A, let's make sure to have a nice exchange of ideas. So let's see. Before I start, I want to thank the event organizers for flying me all the way out to Kazakhstan. I was extended this invitation while I was at South by Southwest in Austin, Texas. And I think that this is a really important event to have. We can share our ideas, we can boost each other up when we're down, we can commiserate maybe over a stiff glass of vodka or cognac. And I want to know more about the state of journalism in your country. You know, I think a lot of us right now in the journalism world are going through some interesting things, whether you're in the United States, here, or really anywhere. And I think we have to work together to make sure that we're reporting the news and getting information to the readers that need that vital information. So anyways, enough about me. Let's get down to business. I'm going to leave time at the end of this for questions and answers, so make sure you're jotting down your ideas as I go along. All right, so what's the one magic trick I can teach you that will instantly ensure that every piece of your journalism goes viral? Well, I can't. There is no one trick. If I could tell you, I would probably save the world, make democracies better, and be a very rich man. But the digital world we live in is changing, and it's very difficult to navigate. Not only do we have to make our reporting accessible to the audiences so that they read in return, but we also have to compete for time. And it's not journalists competing against other journalists. Journalism is competing with video games, online streaming, sports, fashion, social media that has nothing to do with the news. So, you know, there's so much content to consume, but we can't create time. So it's becoming more difficult for journalists to reach out and make sure that people are reading their news. Now, I wish journalism could be as easy as promoting a video of a puppy or a video of any animal for that matter. This is the kind of content that spreads like wildfire, and it penetrates every corner of the internet, and it fills people's hearts with joy. The news, not so much. There's a lot of gloom and doom to it, but it's vital information, and as journalists, we need to get better at distributing that content so people can read it. So let's try to reach this puppy viral status. How do we do it? We need to build trust with readers. We need to implement better strategies, some of which I'll cover today with you. And we need to package our content so that it fits the changing means of distribution as technology evolves. Despite how much I love what I do, I will freely admit to you all that my chosen career can be a stressful and difficult one. The profession of journalism is unrelenting, and journalists work long hours under demanding deadlines covering complex situations. You guys already know that. The way people consume news, the social media platforms that house the distribution, and the audiences that are popping up are changing rapidly over time. Monetization is another key factor that's becoming more difficult for journalists. Additionally, we face many obstacles with governments and crackdowns on freedom of the press. Situations vary country by country, but we're all in the same boat. So as journalists, we need to continue loving our profession, and we have to adapt to new technologies. I don't have all the answers to our current problems, and if I did, the world would be a better and more informed place. But I can provide for you a few tips, tricks, ideas, and models that other outlets are using to help you grow your presence and your newsroom. Virality is exciting, but that's just the first step in getting readers hooked to your news product. All right, the Trump bump. So it's only been a few minutes into my presentation and we're already talking about Trump. When I was working at Politico, I remember one day when the President of the United States tweeted out one of our stories. It was right around that time where a bunch of people in the Trump administration had been spotted hanging out with Russian ambassador to the US, Sergei Kislyak. As the story grew, a lot in the Democratic Party in the United States, many of them were saying that this was unacceptable and that they had never met with the ambassador. But it turns out that many of those Democrats were being hypocritical. One of the reporters at Politico was able to find a photo from 2010 of Nancy Pelosi, then Speaker of the House of Representatives, seated across the table from Sergei Kislyak. So he wrote a story about it, and we published it on Twitter and Facebook. Shortly after, we got the Trump bump. So the president shared the story from his account, @RealDonaldTrump, and the traffic exploded. We used this tool, it's called ChartBeat, and it measures real-time analytics. And we saw the numbers of visitors to the site just skyrocket. But then all of a sudden it plummeted, and we said, well, what's going on? Did the site crash? Well, it turns out that the president had tweeted out something with a misspelling. He had a typo in the first tweet. He had misspelled the word hereby. So he deleted his initial tweet with the error, and he tweeted it again. His correction only meant a momentary pause in all the traffic that was coming in, but it was a real big piece of viral content for us. The tweet generated 38,000 retweets and 115,000 likes. So much traffic was flooding into that specific page that we had to get backup servers for the site to prevent it from crashing. And because Trump has such a huge following, we were able to reach people that might not even know what Politico is as a news organization. So it was a great opportunity to reach out to new audiences and try to get them hooked to the Politico brand. So as a consequence of that, this is an interesting tool that I am addicted to. It's called CrowdTangle. It does a variety of things. CrowdTangle is actually owned by Facebook. It allows you to predict or look at trends as they're growing to see if you can get any sort of intel from what you might want to write about to reach out to your audiences. But the coolest thing I like about CrowdTangle is that there is a plugin for the Chrome browser that allows you to go to any story, click on a button, and it shows you all of this. So as you can see, in addition to the president sharing the tweet, it was shared by many famous politicians in the United States, many journalists, many people I would consider influencers in the Politico sphere. So this is an example of content going viral. And I will confess, moments like these are super exciting. It's kind of addicting. It's like a drug when you see all the page views, you see the uniques, you see the time spent growing on your site. But that doesn't necessarily mean that in order to go viral, you need a retweet or a tweet from President Donald Trump. Here's an example from my new organization. So Politico has 3.5 million followers on Twitter and about 2 million on Facebook. At my new organization, I have fewer than 30,000 followers on all social platforms. So it's a completely different ballgame. But that doesn't mean I haven't had content that's gone viral. And when you're thinking about your content, think about how big you are as a news organization and set up metrics for yourself to figure out what is viral to you and what is normal and what is underperforming. So this is an example of a tweet that I posted during the California Democratic Convention that to me went viral. It got 50 clicks, 15 retweets, 32 likes. And yeah, compared to the Trump tweet, this is really nothing, but for my organization, it was a lot. So don't think that you have to have a ton of retweets like this Trump tweet to actually go viral. Make your definition of viral work for your news organization size and the platforms that you are on. And it's super important when you're thinking about going viral to get to know your readers. If you can't confidently answer all the questions to these demographics, then you need to do a little bit more research. You need to look at your metrics. Who is your audience? And maybe your content isn't going viral because you're not tailoring it to what they want, what they need. And then you also want to know where your audiences are. This is an example. These are the top 14, 15 sites. On the left, it's Kazakhstan. On the right, it's the United States. So you can tell that there's a little bit of a difference there, right? So you just want to make sure you know where your readers are. And maybe you're covering content that's a little bit more favorable for one platform or the other. For example, politics in the United States is really popular on Twitter. My organization, CalMatters, gets a much higher amount of traffic from Twitter than it does Facebook, just because politics is spoken more on Twitter. You have politicians and journalists on the platform talking about those situations. All right, so let's get into some general ideas for how you can make your content go viral. First thing, you want to lure them in with language. Language is super important, and I think the most important part of a story's language is the headline. It's the gateway to your story. And if you don't have an enticing headline, then no one will want to read your story, even if it's a well-reported one. The headline is usually the first thing a reader sees, and it makes them decide whether or not to click. If you write the exceptional headline, you will get a higher click-through rate. I think there's a tendency for a lot of journalists to, when they're finished with the story, just publish it, and they don't take much time in writing the headline. But that's a disservice to your work. Not only do you want to take time crafting a really good headline, but you want to craft several variations of that headline so that you can A/B test things. So, you might think one headline will perform better over the other, but why don't you let your readers and the data speak to whether or not the headline is the best? In terms of writing headlines, you want to use strong verbs. You want to use strong language that gets to the point. Stories often have conflict, good stories at least, and you need to show the clash in the headline of your story. The narrative can show something as intense as the government versus the people, or it can be something as simple and frivolous as how to make sure not to break a yolk when you're frying an egg. Whatever the urgency or severity of the headline, it must speak to the essence of the story. And you also want to make sure that the language is simple, right? You're trying to reach out to a large group of people, and they're scrolling really quickly on their mobile devices or maybe on their laptop. So you want to make sure that the language is understandable. If the language is too complex, if it has obscure references, you end up alienating people, and you're going to lose out on people clicking on your story. Now, that being said, if you're targeting a niche audience, using those obscure references are fine. But if you're trying to get more general readers to your content, then make sure you're not making things too complicated. So, however you decide to craft the headline, you want to make sure that you're tapping into people's emotions. So this is an interesting pie chart from an organization called OK Dork. What they did is they analyzed 10,000 of the most shared stories on the web, and they classified each based on what emotional reaction was coming from that story. So here's a few of those reactions in the pie chart. I think it's telling and kind of actually encouraging that a lot of these reactions are positive ones. So you've got laughter, joy, amusement, and awe. And I think awe is one that journalists can, do the best to serve their readers. People are innately curious and they want to learn about things. They want information that they can use, and journalism provides that. So the more that you can leave your readers in awe, the better. And emotions definitely help things go viral. The image and the text of the story, if it's very positive or very negative, that will help you drive engagement. If your story has a neutral image, if the headline is kind of flat, it's not going to generate the clicks the shares, the time spent that you would get if you had more of a negative or positive leaning to it. And obviously emotion is important, but the one thing you want to remember is avoid bias when eliciting emotion. Let the facts speak for themselves. Let the quotes from the politicians or whoever you're quoting speak for themselves, because you don't want to show any of your biases in headline writing, because that will turn off readers, and you don't want to do that. And also, don't stoke or prey on people's fears. It's one thing to write a headline that will elicit anger. It's another thing to do it all the time to the point where your readers are tired from all the negativity. So just make sure, like with anything in life, that you're taking different approaches and you're using moderation to make sure that your content isn't packaged in a way that would go stale quickly. This is a tweet I like. It's a picture of a poster that hangs in the wall of the Washington Post. It says, "Go talk to people." It's a quote from Marty Barron, who runs the Washington Post. I think this is probably one of the most important things that you can know, not only as a journalist, but as someone who wants to make your content go viral. If you know what people want, you can package it for them and sell it to them. It's a simple but brilliant mantra, but I think we need to keep reminding ourselves this quote so that we can provide good viral content. That being said, so you got to find out what issues matter to your journalists. So get to know your audience and then tailor the content for their needs. This is an example from a story on housing costs in California. Coming from Politico and going to CalMatters, I had more of a general national view of the news, and I didn't really know the topics that mattered to a California audience. But I realized after studying some metrics and seeing how certain tweets and posts perform that people are really concerned about housing policy in the state of California. So what we decided to do was write more content about housing. We decided to promote it more. This is actually, it doesn't show this here, but it's a GIF that shows the price of the median income for Californians and how that's affected their ability to buy housing in the state because it's become so expensive. Another way to get to know your readers and provide them with viral content is to actually generate stories based on their ideas, their questions. So this is a module that we've embedded in certain stories. This one is specifically for our 2018 voter guide, and it's through an organization called Harkin. And what it allows you to do is gather questions that readers submit, and we use these questions in our reporting. So we'll look at the questions, we'll find a few that kind of stoke our curiosity, and then we'll pursue reporting on it. And it's a great way to work directly with readers. I think one of the issues with the media right now is we need to demystify who we are as journalists. We need to be more accessible to readers to get them to engage more with us. And here's one of the examples that we have done from Harkin. We had a gentleman from a city just south of Sacramento. He was trying to buy a house in California, but he and his wife had been saving up for years, and they made a bid for the house, but they were outbidded apparently. So they called the realtor and they asked, "Well, what's happened? We saved up for this house. It was our dream home." And the realtor told them, "Well, you had the highest bid, but someone had the second highest bid. They paid in all cash." So what we did was we investigated if this was a common occurrence in the state of California, and it turns out we found out not only are foreign investors heavily affecting the housing market in California, but also financial firms on Wall Street have a significant impact, to the point where 25% of the housing market is actually owned in some way by a foreign investor or a financial firm. And this really complex story, which actually generated two stories, another in addition to this, was all because someone in Elk Grove, California, was curious why he lost his bid for his dream house. So if you can engage with readers and get them to submit these questions, you'll get really interesting story ideas. And this performed very well. We had very good results with this. But that being said, issues are very hard to sell as a journalist. Here's an example from the G7 summit. I'm sure you guys read some of the headlines. On the left side, you've got issue headlines, and on the right, you've got non-issue headlines. The ones on the left, they focus more on policy, on the substance, but the ones on the right are more, there's a little bit of a dramatic flair to them. It's more about the fighting between Justin Trudeau and Donald Trump, and a lot of the reaction to the way that Trump behaved himself during that summit. And I don't have metrics on these because these are headlines from other news organizations, but I bet you the ones on the right performed much better than the ones on the left. But this isn't to say that issues are impossible to package on social media. This is an example from Politico magazine. The man sitting in this lazy boy, he's John Boehner. He was the former Speaker of the House. You can see he's smoking a cigarette and just relaxing. So the story was a profile on him after he retired as Speaker of the House. And it's a funny story. He has a lot of quotes. He insults a lot of politicians. He drinks a lot of wine. He takes the reporter golfing with him. So it's a very fun story, but the essence of it, the core of it, really highlights the state of the Republican Party in the United States and how during his time and thereafter, the party is splintering. There's a lot of disagreement among different members of the party, but that message was conveyed in a very fun, narrative way that was able to communicate something that's very complex and hard for readers to understand. Okay, so let's go into some different styles that you can test for these headlines. First of all, and I mentioned this earlier, remember to A/B test. It's so important, whether you're doing it on social media, on your site, if you're doing it with Google Ads, whatever the case may be, you want to try out different language because just because you think something will perform well doesn't necessarily mean it will. And let the metrics speak for that. And never stop trying new things. I think one of the issues with journalism, at least in the United States, is a lot of the newsrooms, the paper, print newsrooms, they became complacent. They weren't figuring out how to work with this new thing called the internet, and they didn't evolve quickly enough to stop a lot of the implosion of some of the newsrooms in the United States and the mass layoffs we're seeing in the media industry. So if you have an inkling to try something, just do it. Just try it. If you fail, you know not to do it again. If you succeed, keep trying it again. Replicate that success. So one tip I can give you is use the how or why style of headline. I would also say what is a good one as well. So as journalists, what do? We ask a lot of questions. And those include how, what, why, when, which, what. Two of these are specifically good for crafting headlines. People want answers to what's going on in the world, and there's a lot of complexity. These headlines help give a general understanding of what's going on. And when people see these headlines, they'll go right away, okay, I've been guaranteed information that I need. I'm going to click on that. So here are a few examples. How the media ignored Puerto Rico in one chart. This is a combination of several different styles. I'll go over the visualization and numbers style in a little bit. But yeah, try how and why headlines. And I think there's a lot of headlines or a lot of stories you've already written that can be easily changed to how and why. So sometimes it doesn't even take much rewriting. It's just changing the headline real quick. Here's another example. It's I call it the two-sentence headline. It's one that BuzzFeed uses a lot, and BuzzFeed, as we well know, is very good at making content go viral. To me, it provides more information to pull in the reader, and a lot of times that first sentence kind of builds something up, and the second gives you a shock or a twist that makes you go, oh, this is going to be really interesting. So here's one that's a little bit more emotional. Her daughter was shot in the Santa Fe school massacre. Here's what it's like from one mother. I think this really resonates emotionally with a lot of people who are scared about school shootings in the United States, and especially for parents who send their kids to school and just expect them to have a safe environment for them in which to learn. So I think this is a really good one to test out. One of the downsides, though, is if you're looking on mobile, if the headline is too long, you might not see the entire thing if it is two sentences. So just be careful about length when you're doing these kinds of headlines. Here's an example that I really liked. It's a sillier story, but I'm sure it got plenty of clicks, and I know it went viral because I saw the video circulating on different platforms. So it's about a dog that blew up 3 times his size. I don't actually remember why, but the dog's name is also Trevor, so that's why I like the story. Another good style is the question headline. You probably have seen this a lot. They're okay, but you don't want to overuse them. I think a lot of newsrooms resort to this headline in an attempt to be, engaging and fun, but they kind of get into a rut, and so they just keep using this headline. I know a couple of people at the University of Texas who did some research specifically on question headlines, and they actually determined that it drops engagement, and in fact it was something around 30% click reduction compared to a headline that was not a question. That being said, you don't want to completely avoid these. I think it's a good way of writing a headline, and it does elicit some engagement on social media, especially on the platform if they see the question on the headline and want to respond to it right away. And here's an example from The Atlantic. I think this is a good one because it's a question that a lot of parents in the United States are asking. And I think it's just, it's an appropriate one because it shows that exasperation of, geez, why is this happening? So it really plays into that narrative effect. Sometimes it's all about numbers. People really love their numbers, and if you can fit one in a headline, that's even better. So there are kind of 2 different approaches you can take. One, you can package your story so that it has a number of items that are listed. So this one is a New York Times travel story. Our list of 52 places to go in 2017 is here. Why do people like these kinds of stories? I think, for one, it gives you a set number of things to expect, and it also kind of conveys how much time you can devote in reading the story. So this is an example where you can kind of gloss over it and pick out different things. And I think for some of the newsier items, like what's going on in the world, it gives you kind of the bullet point version of a story that you can easily read so that you're not wasting so much time diving into something that's dense and complex. So if you can package a story in list form, that's all the better. And then numbers can also be used like a statistic. Here's an example, if I can click there. Okay, so this is an example study. 2/3 of American millennials don't know what Auschwitz is. I saw some other variations of this headline that didn't include the number, and I don't think that headline was as good as this. And I think this is kind of a shocking story, obviously. So having that number in the headline just makes it even more shocking. And I think my guess is that this headline was probably, this is from newsy.com. My guess is the headline, the story, was shared a lot on social media. Maybe people didn't click on it necessarily, but it got a ton of shares. And then here's another sad, depressing headline. 6 in 10 of you will share this link without reading it, a new depressing study says. So sometimes your headline can be so good that people won't even click on the link, and they'll just share it to their followers. That's a certain form of virality. You get the exposure. It is better when people do click on the story and actually engage with your news site and become more loyal followers. But yeah, just another example of numbers in your headline. And then this is kind of interesting. This is from Buzzsumo. They looked at 100 million articles and determined which numbers were used most in the headlines and which were actually the most engaging. So number 1 happens to be 10. So top 10 reasons why this chart is accurate or something like that. What I've noticed in my experience is that odd numbers work really well. I don't know why that is exactly, but here's one example from a Politico magazine story, the 199 most Donald Trump things Donald Trump has ever said. I think it's funny that the reporter got all the way to 199 and didn't just go to 200. This was actually during the campaign, so there are probably a lot more things that have been said that could be added to this list. But I think it's funny that he stopped at 199. It's an odd number. And I also like the fact that there's the image of him being very Donald Trump-like. And then the background is this like Roy Lichtenstein style dotting. So I think it's a really good way of packaging everything together. And it uses a lot of different styles. And this story did really go viral. It had a ton of shares, and it had a great engagement time because they had to go through 199 quotes, and we attributed each quote to a source. So then people were also going to these really old articles in which Donald Trump said some pretty ridiculous things. Imagery. Imagery is so important for selling your stories. In fact, I think it's probably just as important as crafting a good headline. And the two need to work together to get people to click. I know from my personal reading habits that when I'm scrolling down a social media feed, I usually see the image first before I see the headline. And if you can stop people mid-scroll, you've accomplished step one in getting them to click. You want to use faces. People tend to click more on content that has faces that convey emotions. Here's an example from the G7. The headline is "Trump torches Macron, his last friend in the G7." And it shows Macron looking at Trump and Merkel looking very discouraged. You want to avoid stock art images. I don't know exactly if you guys know what that is, but anything that's very generic. So like if you're writing about, let's say, the budget of Kazakhstan, you don't want to have a pile of budget papers. You don't want to have like a picture of a building. You want to have the politicians who are actually engaged in the process, their faces, them looking at each other, them maybe, wagging a finger at the other. And negative images tend to perform very well. Positive do as well. Here's a lot of examples of Donald Trump. But you want to be careful not to use too many negative images because it will reveal biases. And as journalists, we want to make sure to keep our reporting as non-partisan as possible so that we can get the most readers and provide the most accurate information. That being said, these negative images do perform very well. Pick a quote. People love quotes. And here's another example in which they might share the piece of content on a social platform, whether that's VK, Facebook, Instagram. They might not necessarily click on it, but you're still getting that exposure to your brand. Here's an example from Anthony Bourdain, and it got 80,000 shares, and that was just from the Anthony Bourdain Parts Unknown page, which is affiliated with CNN, so that definitely helped to have such a huge brand behind the page. But what I would suggest doing is creating quote cards, designing something that fits really well for whatever platform you're the most prevalent on, so that it can get shared. And you can just drop the quote in there, have a photo of the person or thing to which it is referring, and then link somehow back to your website. You might not get a ton of clicks, but you'll probably get more visibility from it just being shared so much than you would with some other ways of packaging your content. Check those facts. So during the 2016 election, one of the most exciting ways to report on the presidential primary debates and the general election debates was through fact-checking. At Politico, we would have an entire team of reporters stationed in a conference room, and each reporter would have some focus. Usually they were a beat reporter, so you would have like an energy reporter, an environmental reporter, and so on. And they would be focusing on instances in which Trump or Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders, etc., would mention a policy issue, and they would fact-check that. Here's an example from PolitiFact. They do a very good job at these kinds of things, and they have kind of like a little meter that shows you, how accurate that statement was. People really like sharing this. If you can immediately say so-and-so was wrong, so-and-so was right, their supporters will engage with that content, their opponents will engage with that content, and it does drive a lot of clicks. And the more that you can do live fact-checking in the moment, the better, because people are tuned in, they're watching, they want to know whether someone is actually speaking the truth or not. Visualizing your data. This is a super important thing to do. I think a lot of us tend to get a little bit too text-heavy with our reporting, but people, users, readers really love charts, interactives, and maps. Here's just a general example from the most recent primary in California, showing the gubernatorial and senatorial primary elections. I think sometimes you can just convey information better in a chart than you can with a lot of text. And visualizations themselves have a lot of viral potential. These are things that you can post on VK, Facebook, Twitter, and people are going to be sharing them because all the information they need is right there. Here's an interesting example from a recent story at CalMatters. So this has to do with different housing policies throughout California at the local level that were voted on during the primary elections. Instead of it being a long story, it's this interactive map that takes you to different cities in California, and you can click to get more information about these different ballot measures. And some of the entries actually have little videos that you can watch to get more content, more background on that ballot measure. So I think this was super engaging. People really liked it. And after I created this GIF for this presentation, I actually then created a GIF version in a tweet to promote this story, and it performed better than any other packaging I had done so far for it. You want to be present when news breaks. I think one of the easiest ways to grow your audiences on platforms is to just cover live news. If you're there, if you're tweeting out, if you're on VK, if you're giving analysis, if you're doing live video, that's great because people will know that you are a source that's tuned in and watching what's going on. I see the most account growth on certain specific days where there is a large event. It could be, a city council meeting. It could be a terrorist attack. Anything that you're covering, if you're covering that using the right hashtags, making sure that you're tagging the key players, using their handles, trying to get a share from them, then you're going to see large account growth. And you want to use language that shows urgency, breaking, developing, just in, the latest. That kind of language really pulls in people because they want to know what's happening that very second. And if you use that language, people are really going to click on your stories. Find fans with big followers. I use this strategy all the time. A lot of the traffic that I've gotten, not only from Politico, but also CalMatters, happens to come from loyal followers who have large followings. So you want to take a look at your content, see who has shared what. Is there a way that you can reach out to certain key players and develop a relationship with them? Maybe they've shared a few of your stories, but they don't really know who you are as a brand. Get to know them better. Make them aware of some of the offerings you have. That way they'll be more aware of you. They'll make sure to follow you. They'll make sure to share your stories. And you can strategize that outreach and build that relationship so that it affects your branding very well. The reason why Cristiano Ronaldo is up here is because he's the most followed celebrity on Facebook. So if you can write stories that Cristiano likes, then you will probably get some viral pickup. Another thing you want to do is package your stories so that they're in video. So this can be video that you share on platforms or video that you have on your site page that you link to. Consumption habits are changing pretty quickly. According to eMarketer, by 2021, there will be some 2.33 billion people watching videos on mobile devices. So as more and more people are watching content on their phones, you want to make sure that you're packaging your stories so that you're a part of this growth, so that you get a share of this viral content that's going out. And so the videos can vary. It can be a very short 2-minute video explaining what happened that day, what you need to know about this, or it can be something a little bit longer. People are really getting into documentaries. If you can create news content that can be uploaded to a streaming service, such as Netflix or Hulu, that's a great way to go viral. Vox.com recently launched an explainer series on Netflix that I'm addicted to, and it just explains things that are relevant in the news, but in a very interesting and non-conventional way. So if you can expand your audience to a streaming service such as Netflix, you'll get a lot more eyeballs and a lot more brand awareness. And also another thing, I don't know if this is the case on VK, but on Facebook, the algorithms controlling the platform are very focused on video. Are people wanting more video? that's hard to say based on what Facebook has told us, but they're prioritizing it in their algorithm. So in order to get the reach that you want on a platform such as Facebook, you really have no choice but to start considering your video strategy. This being said, I think one of the hardest things about video is monetizing it. So you can make really good content, and you can make content that's very viral, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're making a lot of money off of it. So when you take this approach, kind of think about how you'll pay for it and if it's worth it entirely to hire a large video team if you can't, fund them with the money that you're making or with the grants that you have as an organization. And then one thing to remember is never forget your SEO. A lot of the headline styles that I talked about recently, like the how-to, what you need to know, the numbers headlines, also set you up for really good search engine optimization. And if you can combine the strategies of writing a good social headline with the strategies of writing a really good SEO one, then not only will you get traffic on your social platforms, but you'll also get SEO traffic. And sometimes that traffic can be recurring. So let's say you write a story, how to tie your shoelace. Okay, so you write the story, you publish it, and you tweet it out. You get an initial boost in traffic. But if you have really good SEO practices, that story will be indexed higher on Google. So when people are looking for that in a year or so, you might see, waves of traffic coming. And if you do good SEO and news breaks and people want some context about a story, that's another opportunity for you to get some, traffic down the road on something that you wrote maybe a year or two ago. A few things to remember, though, with some of these strategies. Clicks are fleeting, one and done. A lot of people only spend 40 seconds on a page, if even that. Time spent is a valuable metric that you want to work on. How can you design your web pages so that they're more engaging and interactive? Text-only stories, not going to do it. Photos, videos, different interactive charts, keep people looking down the page. So you want to kind of ping them down as they go so that they stay there. And you want to implement processes on your pages to keep readers coming back. It's great that you can get a bunch of clicks on social media, but if they don't come back, if they don't become loyal readers, what's the point? So make sure that you have things on your pages like sign-up modules. Let's say you have a really good newsletter and you want to up the readership. Make sure that you have modules to promote that. Let's say you have a podcast. If you want people to listen to it, make sure to embed modules in those stories so that in addition to coming to your site, they're doing further interactions so that they become more and more loyal so that you can keep them coming back. And there's also a million other strategies that you can use. I've only discussed a few here. I have a workshop tomorrow. I'll be going over these and a few others. But this is just kind of the beginning for how you can make your content go viral on social media. So if you use these tips, hopefully we can get to puppy viral status. But just keep testing things out, keep trying things. Don't get discouraged if you fail. Failure can be such an informative thing. And when you succeed, make sure to document it so that you know how to replicate past successes going into the future. All right, I think we're good. Thank you all.